This is one of the most emotional short films I've seen. I'm always impressed by filmmakers like Toby Cochran, a creative director with over 15 years of experience in animation who can bring even the toughest stories to life with sincerity and love, including the less glamorous parts. Toby has done it all. He's traveled all around the world, he's raised money for various non-profits, he's worked with Netflix, Disney, Marvel. He's directed everything from animated series to commercials to video games, and he founded Big Grin Productions in 2006 with the intention of creating original stories that inspire positive change. But with Luki and the Lights, he took on something much more personal, a short film that was inspired by a real family's journey with ALS. It is beautiful, emotional, heartfelt, and full of hope. It's everything I love about animation and short films. So how do you bring a real-life story into animation, especially one as hard to tackle as this one? That's why today's interview is so exciting. Let's get into it. Hello Toby, and welcome to Write for Animation. It is amazing to have you here. We met at Annecy, was the first time we met in person?
That's right.
We're here to talk about an amazing short film that is now getting a lot of attention. I've seen you all over Hollywood presenting at studios, and I've got to see the short multiple occasions at different festivals. Last time I think it was at Lightbox Expo. I love it. It's a fantastic story, but let's start with the inspiration behind the story.
It's been a wild year with the festival circuit and everything for Luki and the Lights. And the inspiration for this story started from a couple in the Netherlands, Sasha and Anjo. They're featured at the very end of the film, and Anjo is this gentleman that was diagnosed with ALS, also known as motor neuron disease around the world. And if people are familiar with the Ice Bucket Challenge, which was like 10 years ago, or in America it's also called Lou Gehrig's disease, or if people know of Stephen Hawking, that's the disease. And so he was diagnosed with this disease about 6.5 years ago. Him and Sasha had two little children under the age of 10, and they had no idea how to explain this disease and what was going on with his body to their kids. And Sasha, being a teacher by trade and illustrator, started drawing a robot character with giant light bulbs in the joints and things like that. So then the kids could kind of fill in the light bulbs on the piece of paper and follow along with their dad. And as his wrist would go out or elbow would go out, they could fill it in and things like that. From there, Sasha started blogging. They started promoting Luki and educating people in the Netherlands. And it kind of took on its own life, if you will. And about 3 years ago, they reached out to me with Big Grin Productions asking if we would help them bring their story to life. And their story, their mission lined up perfectly with the kind of stories and the things that I want to do with animation.
Tell me a little more about Big Grin and the philosophy and why this story was important to your studio.
Our mission statement is pretty simple. We want to put big old grins on everybody's faces around the world with the work that we create. The whole reason I kind of revamped my company and started it up was to use animation to make an impact in the world, specifically with children's media, because just knowing that the kind of perception out in the world is animation is only for kids, and I know the industry has been trying to fight that for years, it still kind of gets that rap. It's like, okay, if we're going to make stuff for kids, then let's be very intentional with the work that we're putting out into the world. Just knowing any animated films from Disney, Pixar, DreamWorks, all that good stuff over the years can be very impactful and change somebody's life. I just want to be more intentional up front with the kind of client work that we're taking on and the stories that we're creating and wanting to share with the world.
There's something magical. The debate, of course, is artistic. We all agree that animation is not only for kids, but we're talking about Ninja Turtles and how those first experiences, they shape you. And so, but also how being a kid watching animation is that the suspension of disbelief is unique. And so you really believe, you're really immersed. And then we kind of lose it. And I think that animation and film in general is like bringing back that childhood, you know? And so I think that there's a good way to embrace it. I love the mission statement and how it's part of the name.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I feel, to your point, it brings us back to that kind of core child within all of us. When I go to Disneyland and see parents there with their screaming children in strollers and stuff, and I'm like, man, they are not having fun. And it's like talking to people that are new parents and things like that. It's like, well, why did you wait to come to Disneyland and they're like, oh, well, we've got a kid now, so it is an excuse. And I almost feel like that reason is an excuse to allow them to be a kid, to just go and enjoy that sort of thing, versus like, oh, they could have always gone and still enjoyed it.
I must confess, I almost went to Disneyland when we were at Lightbox by myself with my wife. Then I thought, no, our daughters would never forgive us because they'd never been there.
Don't tell them.
Yeah, let's go. No pictures and let's enjoy.
Yeah.
We didn't do it, but it was on my mind for sure. Yeah, I love that philosophy, and also as adults to be able to get back to that suspension of disbelief, which is part of filmmaking in general. How it's like you're pretending that this exists, and to some degree it does exist. I think that your short is more real than most stories, or some things in fiction are more real than on the news. Tell me a little more about how was your approach to theme, because I imagine that when you deal with something like that, you don't want to be preachy, and the short doesn't feel preachy at all. It's really there with the characters. Was that a concern at the beginning for you?
Yeah, absolutely. The original idea came from Sasha and Anya, like I mentioned, and they came to us with a really long outline, and they'd kind of been shopping around to different studios in Europe and things like that, and everybody kept wanting to change it more so for budget reasons, but kind of change the essence of what they're trying to get at. And a lot of times when we work with clients that want to do something very educational, it's that whole thing of, if you're going to feed your kids vegetables, you got to try and sneak it in where you can type of thing, where anything on Disney Junior or things like that, when the writers are writing those episodes and they're trying to pull in inspiration and working with expert advisors and things of that nature, they're sprinkling in the educational bits where it's kind of taking a backseat to the entertainment. And that was one of the big things that we had to help Sasha and Anu kind of understand, because before, for example, the story was very educational in that sense. Originally, it was like almost 20 minutes long, and half of the film took place in the doctor's office because the character Luki kept going back and forth, and it was very accurate to what happens for patients. But in terms of pacing and story and just connecting with the character, it was just boring, and there was no emotional kind of through line.
Was it hard to convince them that it was important to change that?
Yes, they were good sports about learning. My producer Adrian was fantastic in terms of setting up a lot of reference material for them, of pulling pieces on YouTube or DVDs of behind the scenes from the bigger studios that have kind of shared stuff of the process of how everything's made. And we just held their hand and kind of educated them every step of the way. And that helped them. And the other thing that helped us, for me, just as kind of a leader in this role, is like, I knew I needed to earn their trust. And, trust only comes with time. One of the things I committed to was like, we'll explore everything that you have originally written out. And hopefully by us doing that, you'll see where there's holes and what's not working and things like that. That was something that I know that nobody else was going to do studio wise, which was a little crazy. But we did that. Then we could kind of start at the same level and build a foundation and work from there.
You had this long outline that you received. So you're in the field of adaptation. Tell us a little bit about the writing process. How was it for the team, and how much were you involved in bringing this into script format?
I was the only one. I wrote the screenplay for the short. And for me, and it's always kind of said with screenwriting, writing is rewriting. I feel very much the same way about boarding. Boarding is just reboarding throughout that process. And for me, knowing that we had limited time and budget, I wanted to get something on paper as quickly as possible for them and try and construct and cohesively put things together that had a nice flow to everything and that made sense. And then from there, get us to storyboarding as quickly as possible, because I knew the majority of the rewrites were going to come through the boarding. I put a lot of the team members on that originally, knowing that a lot of stuff was probably going to get cut, but I wanted to allow them to see it. And then it allowed me time to revise the script and then also start tweaking the boards, so I could surgically start going in and looking for moments where I could stitch things together or have really nice transitions to help just kind of move the story.
That's what I love about the medium, is the fact that we all collaborate and we are all writers, and you write a lot in the boarding, the animatic. That I think it's magical about animation compared to how live action is usually at studios. And so you use the Unreal Engine, and it's something that I'm fascinated with. And one of the feature films we're working on, we are exploring that pipeline a lot. I know from experiences of other teams that worked with Unreal is that there's a blend between layout once you have your animatic in place. Does that allow a little more of wiggle room to tweak the story later? I want to understand how the pipeline can affect storytelling, because yesterday I was chatting with a friend from Pixar, and she's now directing her short film. And the team is worried because they don't have a picture lock on the animatic. And she was like, at Pixar, we finish films while they're rendering. And you always tweak things to make the story better as much as you can to polish every little detail. I wonder if the pipeline is helpful in that regard, or you didn't see much of a difference.
There's a couple things within that. The process of working in Unreal, I think, is a little bit more dangerous for pushing deadlines up until the very last moment, because it's so easy to change things in Unreal. On the front end, I feel it was amazing to work with, in a sense that traditional animation pipeline, Pixar or wherever, it's very assembly line. Typically, most of the team outside of the leads don't know what's going to be coming down the pipe. And for us, so we did animation and layout in Maya, but as soon as we had layout done in Maya, we would bring that over into Unreal. And of course, we had a lot of bugs to kind of work through and things like that. But as soon as everything was lined up and put in the full sequencer in Unreal, the team, from the animators to the effects artists to the lighters, could go in and see everything. And something that helped us as well is our lead cinematographer, Charlie Ramos. He was insistent on putting a little bit of lighting information with the layout, which was great. So that gave everybody a rough idea very early on. But once we were on Unreal, having the lights and the sun and stuff like that, and be able to move it, and everybody could be in there in their own shot at the same time, that was fantastic. And it allowed us to work and see and make decisions in context versus waiting down the pipe and things like that. So I would say it definitely saved us time in that regard. And then there was other components to working in Unreal that didn't save us time just because of the nature of the beast. And the version we were using was 4.8. We changed to 5.0 during the middle of production. Turns out doing glass was very difficult for the project, but the team was able to kind of figure that out right up until the very end.
Was that an exception after the experience, or has the studio fully embraced Unreal?
I definitely want to continue working with Unreal with projects. We just did a client project working a little bit with some real-time components, and we started playing around with Blender as well. That's something that I'm super curious to push for us internally, is utilizing Blender, just because of all of the awesome shaders and things that people are creating, just to kind of push the style a little bit more and things of that nature. In Luki, we had a very hand-painted feel for the film. It was kind of a 90-10 split of all hand-painted textures. You can feel and see the fingerprints, if you will, the brush strokes of the artist. And then there's about a 10% procedural-based materials on there, so making sure the glass felt like glass and metal had it shine or things like that. If I had my supervisors very early on, we could have written blueprints to like push things a little bit more, but I'm proud of like what we were able to accomplish, because a lot of Unreal projects would feel very much like a video game. I didn't want this to feel like that, so I wanted to push the art direction as much as we could within our constraints.
It's incredible how fast it also from one version to the other, daring changing version middle of production, but I can see why.
Very dangerous.
Yeah, I know. Now back to story. I think that helps you have everybody involved. What are some suggestions you would give to someone that comes from storytelling with little artistic knowledge of maybe boarding, that they want to create their own short film? I'll let you talk and guide you step by step. What would be your suggestion to a group of young people wanting to tell their own stories?
First thing I would say is try to figure out your North Star, if you will, the reason for why you feel compelled to tell this story. I believe everybody is an artist in their soul, and much like what we were saying, that child, that innocence kind of gets lost in us. So being able to kind of tap into that, because going on this journey for making a short film, it can take years. A very kind of quick timeline for a little indie project could be like 2 years, 3 years, but most 5 to 10 years to make something. So you have to know the reason why you're making it and enjoy the process more so than focusing on kind of the end goal. And I would say for me personally, working on Luki and other things, giving yourself moments to realize and find and capture moments of truth and authenticity with the story and the character, because there's going to be times where the character is going to start telling you what they want to say. And if you're open enough to listening to that, it can take you down a path where you might not know. You originally like, oh, I never would have thought of that had I not been listening to that. And for me, a lot of that comes from trusting your gut, your intuition, things like that. I would say that is probably the biggest thing I would share with people wanting to go and make a short film is knowing your North Star and then be ready to be true and authentic to the character and the story that you want to tell.
I love that, because then every obstacle will have that passion, that North Star, that reason, that why will allow you to find the ways to overcome the obstacle or find actually an opportunity within it. What were some of the obstacles that you faced, especially in the early stages in pre-production?
I think the biggest obstacle that I've shared at some of our screening events recently is the fact that we are already on borrowed time, knowing that Anyo had a very short amount of time to live. The doctor gave him, I think, 3 years total to live, and we met him, I think, 2.5, 3 years into his diagnosis. And then our production took an additional 2 years and 7 months. But I do feel that him being a part of the process and every step of the way, we would meet with them sometime twice a week, up to 3 hours. I would have private conversations with him. I think it helped him kind of extend that life expectancy in that way. And he was also a fighter and a stubborn guy like myself. So he wanted to make damn sure he could be there for the finished product. So that was probably the toughest challenge. One story point wise was there's a moment in the film when Luki comes home after being tested all day at the doctor's office, and he's at home. He's really upset. And this was a moment that was never a part of their story outline and things like that, and something that I kind of wrote in there that I felt we needed to just sit with Luki as a character to understand what he's going through and feeling, because all the other scenes were kind of coupled around his friends and kind of exterior things, and we weren't sitting with the emotion and the weight of what he just experienced at the doctor's office. Sasha and Anyo originally pushed back on it because it was a little bit more extreme. I had him like kind of swipe stuff off the countertop. And when I got some advice from my mentors, they were just like, oh, you need to push this, it needs to be more angry and stuff like that. But they fought me on that. And they're like, we don't want this a part of the film. And it was like one of those moments where it's like, it's the note behind the note. So my job was to figure out what is going on for Sasha and Anyo that they're so displeased with this idea. And it turns out for Anyo, he was home alone one day, super frustrated because he knew he'd eventually have to go into a chair. And something pissed him off, and he went to grab something to throw it across the room. But as he went to throw it, his arm gave out and it just dropped. So all he could kind of do was just boil up and kind of explode internally and just scream. And he thought his kids and everybody was outside. And turns out one of his little girls was upstairs, and she comes downstairs and she starts crying because she thought she had kind of done something to make him upset and to make him that mad. So he felt that showing any sort of emotion like that would be encouraging a sense of like maybe domestic violence or things like that in a home. Okay. And once I stepped back and removed myself from the emotion of like, oh, I love this scene, I think I'm a great writer, this is great, right? I stepped back from that and understood where he was coming from. I was able to kind of work around that and speak to, again, if we're being authentic and honest about this scene and this moment with the character, this will be, for me, kind of the linchpin for the story, because it allows and gives the audience permission to be authentic of being frustrated, being upset, and being angry, and wanting to cry, and being confused of what the hell is going on. And not only that, working with our expert, Dr. Melinda Kovna, she confirmed with years of working with children that this was very important to allow children to see in the film.
You were humble as a writer to step back and see what is the reason, and that sounds to me that led to an even better moment, even more authentic, and story-wise it's so powerful. The idea of wanting to throw something and the very things that makes you frustrated, then it's actually adding gas on fire and see the containment, it's even better. So I think it's a beautiful example of how stories are trying to tell you something in some way.
Exactly, and I feel as a director, as a leader, things like that, being in that sort of position, the biggest asset we can bring is being able to listen.
Okay, so Toby is about to give us a mini Making Your Short Film 101 class. But before we go on, I want to invite you to join the Write for Animation Academy. It's a community where you'll connect with other passionate storytellers who are all about improving their craft. We write together, learn together, and help each other thrive in the animation industry. When you join, you get instant access to our short film writing course, where you'll finish your own short film script in just 4 weeks. If you're looking to boost your animation career, join us today at writeforanimation.com/academy. The link is down below. Now, let's get back to Toby. You spoke about the North Star in terms of the thing that leads you, in terms of the passion, the grit that you need, because this is usually, much harder than anyone can expect. Then what would be the next step in terms of more of a practical, we have the mindset that's super important. Then what would be the first practical step for someone to start developing their idea?
Next practical steps is they could start having a whiteboard with sticky notes is great. Writing down themes, what you kind of reverse engineer it. Steve Jobs' approach of starting on the marketing and thinking about what you want your audience to take away. So just have fun with it. Thinking about, I'm in the audience, I finished my film. What do I want people to feel when they watch my movie? And then you're gonna be able to extract some of those themes, those ideas very early on. And then those will kind of help around your North Star of making sure, and you can check back in, is the film too serious or is it too sad? Is it too goofy at moments and things like that? So that's a fun little exercise to start with. And then from there, I personally like to do a lot of the heavy lifting very early on. So for example, with Luki and all of my projects, I will put a creative brief, a deck together and have kind of a clear thinking and strategy there, and then share that with my producer. I'll receive notes if anything's unclear. And then from there, I'll use that to go out to artists and the team. And it's like, hey, here's what I'm thinking I want to do. So in terms of like world building, art direction, 3D style, what I'm thinking for animation, a lot of that might be a little bit overkill for some, but just looking to kind of create a mood board and kind of chunk things down. The biggest thing for especially younger artists is everybody's got big, awesome, audacious goals, but learning to kind of chunk the goals down into more bite-sized or little steps is a big factor to start from there. And then once the deck is together, I can start to think about, okay, who's the best artist that I can team up with that can help bring this to life? And then I'll start reaching out to the artists, see if they're interested, and start building the team from there. And something that was important for me with Luki, just because we didn't have a big budget on this to start, was making sure that all the artists were aligned in knowing what they were getting themselves into and knowing like, okay, I can pay a little bit. It's not proper over industry rates, that sort of thing. But the bigger importance of this is, one, I'll make damn sure I finish this film, and two, people are going to see your work and it's going to make a difference in this world. And it's the very first time anything like this story has ever been done. So people were excited about that, just knowing that they could be a part of something special. So I would say, as you're building your team, if you're working on something that has a great North Star, a very passionate personal reason to tell this story, you'll find a lot of other artists and people that want to help you bring that story to life.
Definitely, I think that it's something that I see a recurring theme. You need to lift something off the ground that has no direct commercial market, a short film, like it's almost zero. Yeah. At the same time, we are all artists and we know how hard it is to put in our time. And what I see happening a lot is the excitement at the beginning, and then things fall apart because one artist drops and then they get hired from a studio. If you had to step in the shoes of someone that they are just their room, they're starting out, they don't have access to artist software and even knowing how to do this. Is it like promise? Is it a contract that ends with zero? How would you suggest someone that is really early on trying to put together a team? What are some pitfalls that you can also help them prevent?
Even if you're not properly hiring somebody, you're just putting a team of friends together. The first 5 people are going to be super important. They're going to be your lifeline, your sounding board, also kind of a trampoline for helping you find other people, because if they're excited about the project, they're probably going to tell their friends, because their friends are going to be like, hey, what are you up to? Like, what are you working on? And then they're going to share and be like, oh, that's cool. And like, actually, I know somebody dealt with that or loves painting backgrounds for this sort of thing. And it can kind of snowball from there. So just finding the very first person that you can kind of trust and confide in this story idea and things like that can be a huge impact. That's probably the very first thing. Like if there's no resources, nothing like that, you don't need a bunch of crazy software and things of that nature. You just pencil and paper, start with the idea, start writing. That's free. Sharing your story idea, like you're sitting at a bar with a buddy and you're just talking about a movie you just enjoyed. That's kind of the casual conversation you can have about this idea. Most of the time when I hear people pitching and things like that, it's that casual and people go, oh, that's interesting. I want to hear more about that. That's where I would start.
Yeah, absolutely. Once you have a producer fall in love with your project, and that happens after a pitch, then things open up for people. And at some point, if someone wants to create something like a CG film, they do need the support of some kind of infrastructure in terms of at least the pipeline. We're on both sides. You've been pitching and trying to find the funding, but also in this case, an idea came to you. What is something that a studio similar to your size or in general, what caught your attention? How do you suggest people, they have their story idea, maybe they've put together the pitch deck, they have the verbal pitch ready. How should they approach studios to see if there's a connection there that can spark the beginning of a production?
Going to Annecy, Kid Screen, Lightbox, things of that nature, even CTN are great places to kind of go and share the idea. For a studio, even being a little indie bootstrap studio that we are, I get a lot of cold emails. Yeah, can you make my film, or can you read my script and things like that? I'm like, no. And I would say doing the cold email is a little difficult. So to me, and this is very cliche, but it's cliche for a reason, this industry is based on relationships. Looking for connections, like maybe, I reach out to Pietro and you know somebody at this studio, but you're friends with them. So it's kind of an easy ask. You're like, hey, Toby's got this cool idea. Would you guys be open to hearing it? That's how it kind of seamlessly can develop. That's the best way these projects can kind of take a life on in that way. And then the other thing is, if you really want, and you're really set on a studio doing it, then doing your homework to make sure that you study and research studios that take on these sort of projects. And maybe most studios really want to tell their own stories. They want us to create original projects and things like that. So looking for studios around the world, Malaysia, Vietnam, all over, right? I mentioned those just because I know a couple up and coming young studios out there that are doing some great work, but they're looking for the stories because they don't necessarily have anything internal they're comfortable with. What I'll share with that is sometimes having an external story, like what we did with Luki, also allows the studio to kind of prove what they can do if given the opportunity.
That's great advice. That's how we met. I think it was in line, maybe.
Yeah, we were in line for turtles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. That's the more natural that we always advise people to. It's also a great way for many writers. We are very introverted, and being there, putting yourself out there, not being afraid of pitching. Finding also the balance of, you don't go with someone, with a pitch and, hey, read this. It's just more casual. All that soft skills I think they are very important. I love that you bring up the opportunity of being of service for someone else's story or bringing new stories to a studio, because I noticed that many of these studios, you look at the amazing art that they are able to produce, but they need writers to bring a story. It happens a lot with games as well. They have the gameplay and everything, like the contract writer, okay, now make up a story out of this gameplay, and this is not the ideal situation. One more question that is also very practical is understanding the budget. I've seen productions where, from a few weeks ago, we got to chat with Denver Jackson. He did the feature film by himself, but he's not the only one. More people are interested in Blender and things like that.
Usman, the Pakistan animated feature film, he did that whole thing over 10 years. That's another crazy project.
Flow, it was 30 people making that film. It's also super impressive. So you have that, which is, okay, save up a lot of money. I close myself in a bunker and work my way. I've been involved in some productions there. Okay, we have almost $1 million for this short film. And then the middle ground. Can you give us an idea of what is the proper range of budget? Because some people, maybe they don't have contacts in the industry, but they do have relatives they have access to resources. Trying to understand, because I think that people might be sometimes confused by how big of a gap between $800,000 or zero, and so you starve while you finish. And just to give some orientation in that regard.
There's a lot of little components to that. Definitely if you're starting out and you're trying to figure out a budget, like you said, team up with a producer that can help you with that. For me, I'm a little weird in the sense that I'm very left and right. I'm split right down the middle. So there's times I feel like I'm not creative enough to do the creative stuff, and I'm too analytical in terms of like thinking about the budget and those sort of concerns and putting up a process in place. So for me, it's a little easier in terms of just knowing being a part of like really small budget projects to the big projects. It's like, okay, I know how much this shot would cost. because it's going to be expensive to render the background over and over and have this big kind of swooping camera move or whatever it may be versus like maybe a Wes Anderson style shot. That was actually something before we received the Epic Mega Grant for Unreal. I framed a lot of the shots to be similar to a Wes Anderson film, but in a sense I wanted to push more storybook formatting. But I knew that if this is the background and my character is just working within the shot, kind of sitcom style a little bit, I can just render this once and then I just can comp in the characters from there. So the cost effective wise, that's going to be very effective. But once we got on Unreal, I could do whatever I wanted. Thinking about budget, the big studios, I think they're around 2 million a minute in the sense of kind of giving you broad numbers. For a short film, the bigger studios, I think from 5 to 7 minutes, they're working with a budget range of $2 to $4 million, which is very generous.
Yeah.
The projects for Blender are a little bit less, but around the range that you had shared. The other component too, when going and looking for investment and finding financiers and things of that nature, be cautious of who you're taking money from, because the more money you take from somebody, you're gonna have to kind of speak to them and meet their demands and things like that. And the less money you take, the more creative control you can have. Guillermo del Toro speaks about this all the time, of taking less money. M. Night Shyamalan finances, produces, writes, directs his own stuff because he gets to say what he wants in those films, right? Whether or not people like his films, I personally don't care because he gets to do whatever he wants with it. And that's pretty rare. So understanding that is a big component. And then the other thing is I would suggest for people to do comps, like look for short films, look for reference, and start to build an idea of a language, a visual language, if you will, of style. Do you want to animate on twos? You know, everybody wants to do something like Spider-Verse, that sort of thing. If you want to do that, it's going to be very costly, but there's a lot of ways to kind of go about it. That's a good way to start as well, is to figure out comps of looking at work that's been done before and finding areas of your story and working with your producer. It's like, okay, we've got 15 sets, we've got 24 characters, we've got 55 props. That's going to be a very expensive film. You know, we just did a bid on somebody wanting to do a short film and they want to do a 7-minute film, but they literally had 16 characters, 20 different locations. And it's like, what do you need all that stuff? I think the bid that we put in was over $2 million and they're like, we only have 200,000. And it's like, okay, if that's the case, then their expectations have to be met with having a proper story that would fit a budget like that. Because that's something that I take personally and want to help educate people in the industry and young and upcoming artists not to take on a bunch of work and overpromise and underdeliver, where this stuff, it takes so damn long and we put so much of our heart and soul into it that a lot of people on the outside don't know how expensive it is or how long it takes. So we need to do our due diligence and educate them and help them understand.
I love that. This is actually one of my favorite interviews. There are so many great artists, but we always stay up in the clouds in terms of the philosophy and this and that, and getting more practical, because I'm seeing more and more that's what people need, education on stuff that is really connected to the industry. And then sometimes people that have spent their lifetime and career at big studios, they don't have a grasp of, okay, yeah, that's that. It's very different outside of the studio. For them, it's also R&D and research when they invest in these short films and they have a platform and whatnot. One thing that I love is that with this example of 16 characters, I'd be willing to bet that the story would be much better once you start removing a lot of that.
And this one in particular was based off of a children's book. There's big creatures and things like that. And it's like, okay, do we need 3 of these big creatures? Or having this kind of production mindset, the designs of these creatures, whether it looks like a dragon or not, can the dragon rig fit this other giant creature rig, and we can reuse assets that way in terms of utilizing our budget appropriately, where the rigging team doesn't have to redo everything in that sense. But to your point, the story is going to be better if you remove those. I feel artists do their best work when we're confined to a little box and we are given limitations. When you're given a budget, and I've seen this over and over the years, is people come from the big studios, they've got a big budget, but they've never been a part of the whole process or understanding from the production management standpoint and producing what it actually takes to manage that budget. And then they overspend, they go over budget, they don't complete the project. And that drives me crazy. Adrian's always told me that he comes from Pixar. If they didn't have a timeline on Toy Story, they'd still be trying to work on finishing Toy Story. That's the other thing for young artists. setting deadlines is crucial. Otherwise, you're just going to noodle on stuff forever. Deadlines can be your best friend. And something for me, little kind of quote I like to live by is discipline equals freedom. So the more disciplined I can be about something and hitting a deadline, even if it's fake, I'll still work towards that deadline to get it done because I'm trying to hold myself accountable. And going back to the team you put together, the team's going to help hold you accountable, so you don't want to let them down.
Even with a solo experience, Denver Jackson was sharing that his currency was sleep. He did all the diligent work of scheduling each day with a goal per day. For him was like, I know that if I don't finish my goal, I need to keep working. So my sleep is at stake, and sleep, besides of course the natural importance of that, it's also the production will not go on because he was solo. So I think Guillermo del Toro says that a movie is finished when they take it from you, like when the studio takes it from you. The other thing that you pointed out was the thing with rigging, two creatures, same rigging. I find that I'm still learning. What are the things that, remember you mentioned Toy Story. I think in Toy Story 4, they have a scene with Forky combing a doll, but the comb is the other way around. And it's perfect for Forky because he doesn't know anything about the world. But it was also super expensive to have the intersection between the hair and the comb. And coming from live action, people would never guess that that's more expensive than an explosion. An explosion could be procedural and that's done. Any resource, any suggestion you would give writers to become more savvy in terms of production?
Especially for writers that want to get into animation or love animation and are writing for it. And I hear this a lot from up and coming writers going to meetups out here in LA, getting into animation, is YouTube University. Go and watch the behind the scenes featurettes. Go and watch the behind the scenes for Brave and seeing Merida's hair just explode off screen and things like that, or seeing what they did on Tangled or all of the big movies. Granted, they've got a big team, like an army behind them to figure out these problems. Hair dynamics, cloth simulation, effects in terms of like water and things like that are super expensive. So kind of understanding the limitations and also the challenges around that and getting feedback early on. It's like, hey, I've got this great story idea. It takes place in this underwater world, and we're going to be coming up out of the water, and we're going to be jumping back down in, and I want this giant sea creature to come over, and then everything's going to light up with this bioluminescence, and then we're going to do this thing where, this creature comes out of the deep, but it's going to erupt, and bubbles and lava are going to come out, and it's like, whoa, that's cool, but is it actually practical, and can you find a way to do that without doing all of that craziness, and finding a way with the story to still get the same moment or that same energy or moment feeling invoked without doing all that craziness?
We could keep going on. I think it's going to be so valuable for many people. We're going through a series of focusing a lot on short films and trying to teach all the ins and outs, all the detail on how, as a writer or story artist, as an artist, you can actually tell your own stories. Now I think it's the best time ever with even all these tools. And also to put it out there and put it out on YouTube, you can get many people watching your stuff that was not possible years ago.
There's no better time than now, and I especially feel with everything going on in the industry, a lot of people are scared about AI stuff and all that. I'm not worried about that at the moment, but for me, it just validates for us as artists to focus back on our own stories. And I see it as like a pendulum. This industry is very cyclical, and the pendulum has shifted all the way to the other side, but the pendulum's got to come back. They're going to need originals in order to create the sequels that are going to generate $225 million at the box office or whatever it may be, right? That all starts from an original. Ninja Turtles, as crazy as it is, probably wouldn't be greenlit today, but it's a billion behemoth of an IP, all because it was a crazy original idea. For me, I'm very passionate about now, after going through the festival circuit, learning all of that, experiencing all of that. I want to share with people so that they can kind of learn from my mistakes and be a part of that process to help anybody that's learning.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And thank you so much for being generous with your time here and beyond and going to these festivals. I think that it's a great way to end with this encouragement. I think that if you're watching this and you have a story, this is the time, put it out there. Also, those new studios, Big Grin, you need new stories that will be the IPs, and so that might become sequels. I think that a sequel can be wonderful. I mean, a sequel can be a wonderful film. It's not about the fact that it's a sequel, but the story within.
Coming back to that North Star, the intention of it, and also these sequels, they're keeping people employed, so they can be just as great as the original, if not better.
Well, thank you so much, Toby. I'm very, very thankful for your time and friendship.
Absolutely, Pietro. Thank you so much for having me.
Toby is the kind of creator who's always chasing stories that matter. You know, the ones that really stick with you. In this video, I'll share one simple tip that can instantly elevate your story and make it even more powerful and meaningful. I am Pietro, this is Right for Animation, and I'll see you in the next video.